Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hey Krishna, Purna Sindhu, Dinabandhu, Jagatpade, Gopisha, Gopi Kanta, Radha. My old friend Tripurari Maharaj, a devotee went to him and said, this is in the time when they were banning Sridhar Maharaj and Sridhar Maharaj's books and stuff, So this devotee comes to Tripurari Maharaj, he goes, somebody gave me this book by Sridhar, and I know it's just, it's full of this, it's up a Siddhanta, or it's nonsense, but I'm just not advanced enough to put my finger on it. But Maharaj, I'm sure you could. So if you could read this and then tell me, put your finger on the nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. So he tricked him into reading Sridhar Maharaj's book. And he comes out of the room the next day and goes, "This is it! This is it! This is it!"
What is that?
Huh? Eureka! Eureka! Yeah, it was Eureka. I mean, you don't know. You read it now and well, yeah, okay, there's some good things in there and everything, but you have to understand that was at a time when everything this is about is being misunderstood in ISKCON. Every part of it is being misunderstood. None of it is being properly understood. None of it. And it's still that way today. That's why I say there's not one department of the Siddhanta which they know either completely or correctly. They know part of it, but not all of it, or they got it wrong. Everything there is, Krishna, Radha, Harinam, Nityananda, Lord Caitanya, Panchatattva, Gadadhar Pandit, Shastra, everything there is. They either know part of it, but not the rest of it, or they got it wrong. That's not what we want. Yes, there is a plane where we may bow our head and say, I don't understand. But that should not be about, the Guru should not be doing that about the most fundamental things that there are. That should be, yes, on the highest plane, yes, I bow my head humbly. I do not. I have not been taken there. I do not understand that. It's beyond my reach. And that humility should be there everywhere. But for the beginner, like I met this one devotee in Czech Republic, I think. I don't know, you were there or Vishnu Maharaj was there. Talked to this one devotee for a few hours and he goes, "Wow, you know everything." And I said, "Well, actually, I know more than that." I thought that was a good one. In other words, yes, I know things that you can't even answer, right? You can't even ask the question at this stage. And I know those things also. But then with humility, I have to say, yes, but then that there are things that I don't know the answers to. But they are not on the basic level. They're on the higher level. I mean, once Harisari wrote that letter, we have that little punchline. He said, Prabhupada listened to one of my classes in, what year was that, 1976.
Oh, you were listening to your class.
Yeah, I was giving a class on Prabhupada's veranda, and he was sitting in his room, and the door was open. I noticed twice he did that. He listened to me give a Sunday class once to the Sunday thing, and his room was above the temple room, and the door opened up in the beginning of the class about this much, But I never heard anything about that. But later, in the Hyderabad farm, that day, that's the same day, actually the same day that Prabhupada asked me to chant on beads for the devotees that were getting initiated. That was a shock. I mean, Prabhupada is right there, and he calls me over, and they give me 3 sets of beads, and Prabhupada is taking massage, and his secretary says, Prabhupada wants you to chant on these beads for the new initiates. There was 3 people. One of them was a couple, and about 8 years ago, or sometime or not, somebody comes up to me in Vrindavan and says, "Oh, you chanted on our beads for Prabhupada." It was a man and his wife, Indian couple. Yeah. I don't remember their names. Oh, so that day I gave class in the morning, and I don't know, what was it, 35 years later, almost 35 years later, I got a letter from Prabhupada's secretary, Hari Sari, and you know who he is, Hari Sari Prabhupada. And he said, yes, I was sitting in the room and Prabhupada listened to your class. And when the class was over, Prabhupada said, our Jagat Guru Swami knows the philosophy very well. So then I tell people, you better be careful because I know it 100 times better now. That was almost 40 years ago. It's just to scare away my enemies, you know. So sometimes a devotee may boast. What if one book said everything? We boast about the Bhagavad Gita. There are so many questions the Bhagavad Gita will not answer. Mm-hmm. But those questions don't concern anybody who's still in the material world, you see. So sometimes, you know, Prabhupada is saying, I have seen. You say God is dead? I saw him this morning. Oh, wow, Prabhupada saw Krishna this morning. Yes and no. Yes and no. Then they ask the same question to Srila Maharaj. It's called fishing. You want this. You want the same. You ask the same question, and you're waiting to hear the same answer, right? And Srila Maharaj wasn't going to be played like that, and he gave his answer, which is the answer you will hear from 99.9999. Not even 1 in 100,000 or 1,000,000 devotees will say, "Yes, I have seen Krishna." And he said, no, I have not seen. Then they're like, oh, Guru Maharaj, there's just a few devotees here. You can tell us. They're just trying to pull this question. And finally he said, no, but I think I'm on the right path. And why? Because that's the actual feeling of the devotee. But I have no doubt that also that he did not realize Krishna or see Krishna. That seeing Krishna is also in stages. Once Babaji, you know who Babaji was? Babaji was Prabhupada's friend. It's the only friend he had in his last years. By friend, I mean who would sit in his room, joke with him, give Prabhupada a massage, but he was not his disciple. He was not even in our Sampradaya. He was in the Nimbarka Sampradaya. His name was Babaji. And he's the one who donated the land for the Krishna Balaram, not temple, Gurukul. He gave that land. And one day, in the last month or so of Prabhupada's presence, Prabhupada called him to his bedside and he said, he was saying Babaji told us this about 4 years later. He said, but then it's Babaji, better maybe add a grain of salt there, just like, interesting. Anyway, Prabhupada called Babaji to his bedside, and he said, Babaji, that's his name, Bhagat. So, he said, Babaji, when I was coming to America, I had heart attack on the boat. And Babaji said, yes, Prabhupada, and in a dream, Krishna came and saved you, he said. And then Prabhupada reached up and grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him over close and said, not like that. Krishna came personally and massaged my heart. And so, but it was Babaji. Maybe he was adding a little chili there, a little salsa or something, but yeah, not just a dream that Krishna came and saved me, because that's how Prabhupada told the story to everybody else. But on that day he said, no, not like that. Actually, Krishna came and massaged my heart. So these things do happen in the lives of devotees, but these are not the lead cards. This is not for the public at all. Why? Because that stuff just becomes Sahajiyism. And Kapoor writes a book called Braj Ki Baat. And every story is, Krishna coming and putting his hands on some lady who's washing clothes and chanting Hare Krishna and coming and stealing the water pot and all this stuff. The same thing like a magician's da-da-da-da-da-da. Next story, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's just like, what? It's the same story. And then he wrote about Gorkashore Das Babaji. Or no, was it Jagannath Das Babaji? Jagannath Das, because Gorkashore didn't actually come to the Braj or stay in the Braj. And the same thing. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Nothing different. The same thing. And I told Dr. Kapoor, who's Prabhupada's godbrother, who's Bhakti Siddhanta's disciple, He put this thing in front of me at a time, and I just told him, Kapoor, I don't believe this stuff. Well, that's the kind of world I've had to be in. Right there with a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta and have to tell him, I don't believe this. And put it right back in front of him. I don't believe this. No, that isn't that. I said, I don't believe these things, Kapoor. It's the same thing. It's too cheap. I believe it's possible. Maybe one of those stories is true. But all these stories about this thing, all these people in the last 300 years that had Krishna darshan, and I said, I told him I would go in Prabhupada's room early in the morning. Prabhupada's room, he had a sitting room about this much big, right? And he had his desk over here. And they're called guttas in India. It's a thin mattress about this thick, right? Cotton. Goes down on the floor. They're like the size of a bed, and you join them together. Then you cover that with big white sheets, cotton, white. And you can imagine how many times a day you're sometimes changing that, the public coming in, people with dirty feet. And I'd go in that room early in the morning, and I said, I didn't see any little footprints of Krishna, and everything's all ruffled up and everything. But you're trying to tell me there's some lady out here in the Braj washing clothes, chanting Hare Krishna, and Krishna comes and leaves his footprints on her nicely washed white linen. I said, I don't believe these things. I don't believe it. They're very cheap. But in the common people, just like here, the miracles of Jesus, the miracles. With the miracles, all people believe in miracles. Common people believe in miracles. That's why I wrote that essay, Life in Miracles. I wrote a little book. We want to get that translated in Spanish. It's really good for common people because we never think about, actually Lord Caitanya did perform miracles. The blind, the leprosy, created mangoes, gold from tamarind seeds. He did all these miracles, but on the real path of devotion, those miracles are not even like, he did do miracles. But the people that follow Jesus, the miracles are the proof of his divinity. But on the real path of bhakti, those miracles or amazing things, they're more humorous than they are like proof of divinity. It's not proof of divinity on a higher level. Proof of divinity, what is proof of divinity? Is faith, shraddha, real shraddha. That doesn't take place in the mind, what you believe. That's not shraddha. Shraddha is very, very different. Much, much deeper. But shraddha is that which confirms that which is beyond your senses. You cannot see, you cannot hear all these things. There's a book that those of you who are a little more studious or have not finished, but read much of the other literature first, like the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita at least 100 times, Nectar Devotion 7 or 20 times, Isha Upanishad 100 times. When you've done that, then you can read this book called Bhajan Rahasya by Bhakti Vinod. And there he explains how the whole Leela of Krishna is compacted up in the sound you chant every day. Hare Krishna. The Leela of Krishna is there. And he also mentions how one day while chanting the holy name, the whole world just turned into Vaikuntha, Goloka, right in his very house, just changed into the spiritual world. But probably the household servant just checked in to see if he was ready for his breakfast or something, and he was just sitting in a chair, and he didn't see anything. But he had the vision. He says, my home was transformed into Goloka. So a very nice book. It's called Bhajan Rahasya. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Purna Sindhu, Dinabandhu, Jagatpade, Gopisha, Gopi Kanta, Radha